Okay, today we are going to make a turn in the course that is going to sort of last most of the rest of the course. What we're going to see is theories that deal in one way or another with emotions, social development, with Kohlberg not so much emotions, but for now we're going to be heavy into emotions, social development. Okay? We have already seen that Bandura, in the course of doing his studies on learning, found out, I don't know if it's to his amazement or not, but that a person's attitude toward her ability, that is her day in the day I'm doing this, is actually more important, is a better predictor of whether the person's going to learn than the actual skills judged by some independent person. And there are a whole bunch of people who are going to tell us that's what education's about. It's about making people mentally healthy. And because I think we've already decided, most of the stuff you learn you forget anyway. Making people mentally healthy, giving people a proper attitude, and while the person is going through the educational process, understanding where the person, I don't know how else to say this, is coming from. What are the person's emotional background and cognitive background? Now, I must tell you, I'm very sympathetic to this. I do think, you may have gathered by now, that education ought to be about thinking, not about learning facts, even though I spent a long time on that because I wanted to set it up, but it also should be about emotional health. Now, something very strange is going to happen here. You could probably pick at random 100 educational psychology courses at various levels, and probably none of them will talk about Freud. But I'm going to talk about Freud. Because Freud is really the granddaddy of all this stuff, and much of what you will hear in courses, graduate courses, Erikson's theory, you'll hear a lot, especially in counseling courses, about Maslow's theory. They all come from Freud or the reactions against Freud. Besides Freud is from, we talk about thinking today, we're going to talk about sex. Woo, right? And you'll see it. Okay. So today we're going to talk about here. Let's take a look at the PowerPoint. Freud and the Freudians. Actually, we're going to talk about Freud, and we're going to talk about one Freudian who was Erikson, but that'll be next time. And we're going to talk about Sigmund Freud. There he is with his cigar. When most people think about Freud, they usually think about this, right? People on the couch getting psychoanalyzed. But we're going to go into Freud's theory and take a look at this theory and see what's going on here. Okay, so let's stay here. Okay, Freud's theory is a psychosexual theory. And here's some terms we need. See if you get my picture in the corner there? Sex. That's the first thing. That's important for Freud. To him, it's all based on sex. But he means something different from sex than ordinary people. It's anything that brings pleasure is for Freud sexual. He wrote in German, so I don't know exactly how this comes about in the translation, but that's what he's talking about. He talks about the libido, thank you. He talks about the libido, which is sexual energy. And as a matter of fact, just to go back here, we're going to see that there's pleasure in other areas of the body other than the genitals. Like, how many people say, I can't eat another thing. I'm full, I've had plenty to eat. And out comes the pie a la mode. Oh, I think I have a little of that, right? Nothing better than, for me, apple pie with chocolate ice cream. I know it's supposed to be vanilla. Soft chocolate ice cream. Oh, you like that, huh? No? Push it down, push it down.
It just sounds a little...
No, the soft chocolate yogurt swirl. Oh, yeah. So you eat it, not obviously it's not because you're hungry, but because it's pleasurable, tastes good. We'll talk about that. Okay? And for Freud, talk about libido, he talks about sexual energy. Once again, you have to remember, he's talking about the energy that's going to apply to any pleasure, not just eventually adult genital pleasure. And he talks about erogenous zones. An erogenous zone is the area of the body in which sexual energy is concentrated. It's an area of the body that brings pleasure. Okay, now the genitals are obviously going to be involved in this, but they're not the only ones. Okay? Got to keep this in mind. And so we've got to get some Freudian concepts. Freud talks about personality constructs, and he talks about stages of development. And how these mix and match is tough. And it's the same with Piaget. If you talk about one first, you neglect when you talk about it, you should know something about the other, and vice versa. His personality constructs are the id, the ego, and the superego, and he talks about 5 stages of development: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. We'll talk about this. But first, let's talk about the id, about the stages, and we're going to start with the id. The id. Bright red. I'm not supposed to put red on television, but I just made this red. The others, it's because it's burning with emotions, okay? The id is innate. This is the nature of a human being. What the id is. This is how you are born, how we are all born. It is motivated by pleasure. So human beings are motivated by pleasure. That's the fundamental motivation. It's the source of libidinal energy. So as we see this libidinal energy go from area to area of the body, it's all coming from the id. It contains the basic drives like hunger, thirst, and it doesn't like to be frustrated. So when those basic drives, when my basic wants are frustrated, I get aggressive, angry destruction. That all comes from the id. It contains no logic or rational thoughts, just desires. Okay, so come back to me. That, says Freud, is the nature of a human being. Driven by pleasure. I want what I want now. I want to do what I want to do now. I don't want any restrictions. And if you try to restrict me, I get angry, hostile, and destructive. So in case you haven't figured it out, for Freud, people are basically rotten. We're going to see in a couple of weeks, Maslow's going to come along and say, I don't think so. I think people are basically good. Okay? By the way, Freud was an MD. He was a doctor. He started out as a neurologist. Mental illnesses, emotions, upsets were considered to be neurological in nature. There's something wrong with your nervous system. And Freud was the one who broke away. I can't remember the name of his mentor. He broke away from him. And he finally said, I don't think so. I think something else is going on here. Interesting enough, if you get the complete works of Freud, the first articles you'll see was some articles on cocaine. Freud did some of the early work on cocaine's ability to deaden pain. He was always interested in that, in people's pain and how to alleviate pain. And he went from this physical pain to how to alleviate emotional pain. So if don't look at me, that's how you are too. You're a rotten person. You want what you want whenever you want it. And if people don't give it to you, you get angry and hostile and aggressive. That, says Freud, is the basic nature of human beings. Yeah? Charcot?
The person that was his mentor.
I don't remember.
That's what it says in the book.
Could be. His physiological mentor or his...
In Paris, a laboratory.
In Paris, a laboratory there. Well, we have to push it down.
Hysteria.
Yeah, no. Before that, actually. He worked in a neurological lab. He worked with a neurologist. That's right. Charcot was the one who started working with him, was the first one who gave him the hint that it's not just physiological. Okay, so now let me ask you a question. Okay? This is who I am. I say, let's see, get somebody in the center. Here we go. Ooh, nice pen. Hey, look what's over there. Pick up this book. I smash him in the head. Let me see your watch. Oh, watch. Okay? And I steal his pen. He's lying on the floor, and I say, ooh, nice watch. Take this watch, jab it in her eye, steal the watch. That's how I am. You tell me what is going to prevent me from stealing the pen and the watch. What's going to prevent? Say it. Push it down.
I said my mace,
Why? Go ahead.
because I'd sprayed in your eye before. I could take one.
Oh, your mace. That's right. Consequences. What are you, nuts? But let's say I figured out how to jump you from the back, so I got you on. Why else wouldn't I, in this room, go now and mug someone and steal what I wanted?
You're on video.
What are you, nuts? Look at all the witnesses. You lost your mind? Look at all the witnesses. Or, you better watch out, she's younger and faster than you and she's got mace, right? And so what happens, says Freud, let's go back to the PowerPoint. What happens, says Freud, is that out of interaction with the environment, the id's coming up against reality, we develop an ego. Das Ich, the I, he called it. Okay, and the ego develops as the id comes into contact with reality. Right? In other words, you can't have what you want whenever you want because there are consequences. This thing's on videotape. What are you, nuts? You'll get thrown in jail. That it doesn't want. So the ego is governed by the reality principle. It's logical. It's rational. It's cool. It uses reasoning to come to conclusion, and it serves as a check on the id. Delays action until they are reasonable. In other words, come back to me, the id says, don't be a dope. You want to steal the pen? Make the class go a little longer. So you're sure it's dark outside? Follow him to his car, look around, and when there's nobody there, then smash him over the head. That's really what the id says. Okay? You understand? And basically, you know people like that, people with no conscience. They're not going to go and just jump on you. They want what they want. They're going to get what they want, but there's reality. Well, what do we call those people? No, not politicians, right? Okay, they're people without conscience. We'll see how Kohlberg explains the same things. Everyone has noticed people like that. People are rational, but don't seem to have any moral compunctions about doing things at all. Just, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So the ego is a check. Later, we're going to see that the ego not only mediates between the id and reality, but between the id and the superego, which is your conscience. Okay? So Freud says, so it's interesting. The ego's innate. I mean, the id's innate. The id is innate. The ego sort of sounds like Piaget, right? By interaction with the environment, you develop a reality principle. And then Freud says, one more personality structure, and this one we can discuss much better when we actually talk about the stages. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, is the superego. The superego develops as a result of internalizing parental standards and values. This sounds just like Skinner, right? Learning. It's amazing. I have my little thing about where theories fit. Freud's theory is a very hard one to categorize. Why this is done, we'll see when we discuss the Oedipal stage. It comes about in the Oedipal stage. And most people think it has two aspects. It has the conscience and it has the ego ideal. Okay? Okay, most people when they talk about the superego, they think it's the same thing as the conscience, but it's not. So let's talk about these one at a time. The conscience tells us what not to do and punishes us if we do something wrong by making us have feelings of, somebody say it? Guilt. Push it down. Go ahead. Guilt. There, watch this, how dramatic it is. Guilt. Again, I'm not supposed to make it red, but I did it for a reason, okay? Guilt. Okay, so come back to me now. So, Oscar, right? So now the reason that I don't wait for a dark night and mug Oscar to steal his pen is because I'll feel guilty if I do. Now, why I do that, when we get to the Oedipal stage, we'll figure out why. And tell me your name again, I forgot. And why I don't then take this pen and stab Heather in the eye and steal her, because I feel guilty. It's not the right thing to do. They're both worried about how strong my superego is, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to go to jail for a pen. Now, if you had a Rolex watch, that would be something else. Right? By the way, the superego will make that kind of the ego will make that kind of decision. Well, let me see. Right, a Piaget watch. Very good. Very good. They're actually more expensive than Rolexes, I think. Yeah, they are. That was good. I got to laugh again. That was funny. I once looked Piaget on the internet. I got 72 ads for watches. One thing about a psychologist, right? You have to put in Jean Piaget. So, you know about Piaget watches? Oh, boy. If you can get a Piaget watch, what's the cheapest one? $25,000? More. I mean, they cost 10 times? They cost a fortune.
Why are they so expensive?
Why are they so expensive? I don't know. It's the name. They make 10 a year, something like that. If you can get a couple $1 million for 10 watches, that's all you need to make, right? It's so you, right? So in the end, the ego might say, look, you know, if I'm going to do something wrong, what are the odds of it? I once was in a store, and I'm writing a check. It's a drugstore for $5 and something. The guy wants to see ID. I said, $5? He said the smallest bad check that he ever got was for $2.19. And it wasn't an accident. The guy was passing bad paper all over. They caught him. A minute, the first thing that came to my mind was, for $2.19, you're risking going to jail? It has to be at least $500,000. But interestingly enough, I later found out that there's a certain sum. So if you pass 100 checks for under, I think, $10, it's just a series of misdemeanors. You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't become a felony until it's over a certain amount. So that's what the ego is doing, figuring it out. Is it worth it? What'll happen to me if I do it? I figure $10 million, it's worth a shot. Right? Go to jail, you go to jail. Something, you know. If not, you got $10 million, live in Brazil, it's fine. Right? So, does anybody know everybody says to run to Brazil? There's no extradition treaty with Brazil. So at least there didn't used to be. I don't know if there is now. But in any case, you get the point. The ego's making these, but the superego says it doesn't matter if it's $20 billion. And you're 99.9% sure you can get away with it. It's wrong. It's guilt. You shouldn't do it. But there's more than that to the superego. There's also, let's go back to the PowerPoint, there's also the ego ideal. Hit the wrong button. Here we go. I'll get back there. There's the ego ideal. And the ego ideal tells us what to do. It's the positive aspect of the superego. It gives us life's goals. It gives us ideas and ideals. Okay? So, come back to me. So it's not just, thanks, it's not just that the superego tells us what's wrong to do. It also gives us values and goals in life. Once again, these are internalized from parents. Okay? What you should do. They come from parents. Right? The values that tell you what to do and the values that tell you not to do. It's a set of values, both don't do this and you should do that. Interestingly enough, Freudians will tell you that one of the sources of mental illness is an overdeveloped superego. Guilt, guilt, guilt. People who don't understand Freud well will say, all guilt is bad. Freudians will say, I don't think so. I should feel guilty if I'm considering mugging somebody and stealing his pen, right? And blinding another person, or stabbing another person in an eye to get her watch. But it's unnecessary guilt. All of you have had the following experiences with a parent. Your parent asks you to do something. It's unreasonable. It's ridiculous. The rational part of you is saying to say no. And when you do say no, you feel guilty. Am I right? Am I right? Or in other circumstances, you tell a kid no, and you feel guilty, even though you know it's the right thing. That's less common, but it happens. Or you tell a boss no, you tell somebody, or you tell a friend no, and you feel guilty. Right? This is the whole question of enabling. You know what I'm talking about, enabling? The person who will give the alcoholic money for a drink. The person who will constantly feed a person's illness, right? because they do it because you feel guilty if you say no. You know rationally it's the right thing. And that, of course, is the question of how do you get a healthy superego, and we'll get to that when we get to the stages of development. Okay? Now, let's talk about the stages of development. Let's talk about the stages of development. Okay, come to me for a second. Okay, unlike, I'm going to have to get out of here because I moved something and I didn't. Unlike these stages, although they come in order, they're unlike Piaget's stages. Oh, I messed something up bad here. They're unlike Piaget's stages in several ways, and they're like them in several ways. First of all, well, wait, just let me get here to, where is this thing? Just wait a minute, wait a minute. I got something I have to show you from another slide. Okay. Dead time on television, what a horrible thing. Ooh, terrible, terrible, terrible. Here we go, here we go. Here we go, wait a minute, I found it. Okay, so let's take a look at these stages and compare them to Piaget's stages. Okay, first let's go to the PowerPoint. Here are the characteristics of stages. Each stage is named for the area of the body on which sexual energy, on which libido is centered during that stage. So at the oral stage, it's in the mouth. Okay, at the anal stage, it's in the bodily functions, right? On the anus and on, yeah, that's more there. Okay, etc. Okay, the stages are sequential, but they are not hierarchical. Okay, do we go into this already? Let's do it again. Okay, come back to me for a second. Okay, remember, Piaget's stages, I think we talked about hierarchy and sequence already, didn't we? We're going to do it again. Piaget's stages are hierarchical, Freud's are not. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the question is, what's a hierarchy? Remember this? In Piaget's stages, you have to successfully complete, resolve, equilibrate, run stage before you go to the next one. If you don't get a stage right, you're not going on. Okay? Freud's stages are not like that. Okay? Hierarchical stages are sequential. They come in an order. See if you can get my picture in there? Hierarchical stages come in an order. First sensory motor, then pre-operation, cognitive, more operational. So all hierarchical stages are sequential. But Freud's stages are sequential, or oral, anal, Oedipal, latency, genital, but they're not hierarchical because they're biologically wired, and when the time to come, they come. But there are prices to pay in your adult personality if you don't resolve a stage well. And nobody resolves them perfectly, obviously. Okay? Well, I don't know if it's obvious, but pretty soon it will be. Okay. So come back to me for a second. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the nature of these stages, and then we're going to go through the stages. Okay, once more. Phooey. I'm getting there. Okay. Okay, now what happens, let's go back to the PowerPoint. What happens is that if you don't get a stage well resolved, you can regress to it under times of tension or be fixated at this stage. Your adult personality, you're way up there in the genital stage already, right? You're 20-something, 30-something, 40-something. You're an adolescent. You're in the genital stage. But there are still fixations at the other stages. Parts of your personality that reflect what happened to you at the other stages. Like oral pleasure, right? Oh, coconuts and chocolate, yum, yum. That's what it's called, a yum yum cookie, coconuts and chocolate. Nothing better in the world. Okay, or I don't know. Anybody like Brussels sprouts? Who likes Brussels sprouts? 4 of us, 5, 6, oh, a lot. Okay? Oh boy, Brussels sprouts. Who would rather have a Brussels sprouts than ice cream? Thank God for that. You would rather have Brussels sprouts than ice cream? The guy running the camera guy, I don't even know how to say his name. It's too embarrassing. Okay? So you get the point here. Okay? So what happens, and the less well resolved the stage is, the more you will have fixations at that stage, and the more under times of stress you will regress back to that stage. Okay? And we'll take a look at this. Okay, so that having been said, so in other words, for Piaget, there's no regressing. You're not going to go on until you get it right. That's what Maslow's going to tell us too. This stage has to be finished down right. Okay? Freud and Erikson are going to tell us that's not true. They're going to come, but if you don't get a good resolution of a stage, you can see for Erikson it's possible, Freud it's basically impossible. That's going to affect negatively or in certain characteristic ways your later personality. Okay? It's going to be deep, deep in personality. Okay? So let me say a few things here now about Freud's stages so that get the idea. Okay, Freud is going to tell us that as we go through these stages, a few more things, that as we go through these stages, we're going to deal with the conflicts in certain ways. And that as we deal with these conflicts, they are going to cause deep-seated kinds of approaches to life to be in our personality. Okay? We will see, for instance, Freud's explanation of homosexuality. We'll get to it. Now, what Freud is going to tell you, and that's why, and anybody who has even the slightest background in Freud will tell you, oh, it's innate, oh, it's learned. No, it's neither. It comes about, it's not innate, but it comes about as a result of interaction with the environment, and it's fixed deep, deep, deep in personality. Now, whether you agreed with Freud's explanations about all these kinds of things or not, I'll tell you, I don't too much. That idea, the idea of the unconscious, the idea that unconscious things motivate us, the idea that there are certain ways we are that are deep in our personality and very difficult to change, and we'll run into those, that comes from Freud. Okay? And if you're going to work with people, right, you can try all you want to get the messy person to be as organized as can be. You are wasting your time, says Freud. And a lot of other people too, you're wasting your time. When we get to the oral anal personalities, you'll see. Some things are just deep in personality. Let's go through these stages and take a look at them. Okay, first we have the oral stage. And it's a stage in infancy. And energy from the libido is centered on the mouth. I don't know why that's red. I'll change it. I'll try to remember to change it. It's centered on the mouth. Mouth. Kids are always sticking stuff in their mouth, right? And it has two periods. The early period is the first few months of life, characterized by narcissism. Does anybody know who Narcissus was in Greek mythology? Who knows who Narcissus was? Somebody knows, so I can take it. Come back to me. Who was Narcissus? Anybody know? Go ahead.
Wasn't he the fellow who was staring at his reflection in a pond and fell into it or something like that?
He stared at his own reflection in the pond, and what happened?
Yeah, fell in and drowned.
No, he didn't fall in and drown. What happened to him? That's exactly what he said. Yeah, go ahead.
He fell in love with himself.
Yeah, he fell in love with it. Now here was a Freud. He fell in love with himself. He looked at this beautiful, beautiful young man with these gorgeous features, and he said, oh, he fell instantly in love. Because it was with himself. It was his own reflection. What Freud is going to tell you is the kinds of things, there are things deep in our personality that we don't want to admit. So we repress them, we suppress them, but they have a profound effect, an unconscious effect, on what we're doing and what we're thinking. We're not going to have a big course in Freudianism here, but if you walk past anybody ever go through a porno shop? Yeah. Sure you all do. Don't lie to me, right? One of the best jobs I have as a graduate student, my professor says to me, I have to take a look at how women are treated in literature. Here's $40. That was a lot of money in the 1970s. Go and buy all the porno you can. I said, all right. I'll bring it to you in a couple of days. I brought it to that day. Go and buy every porno magazine you can find. We're going to go through it, right? Here's enough. She signed another person to go through it. What kind of business is that? I buy all the porno. Okay, so you go to a porn shop and there's some things you go, woo, but somebody likes it. And some things you go, well, it might be interesting, or yeah, that turns me on. And you don't know why. You have no idea why. Freud is going to tell you the reason some of us like coconuts and the reason some of us hate coconuts is not physiological. It's something deep in your personality. I happen not to agree with him, but that's what he's going to tell you. Freud is going to tell you nothing is by accident. That's where the term Freudian slip comes from. Right? Your unconscious is saying what you really want to say rather than what your conscious is telling you should say. Okay? That's where it comes from, that it's all deep in there. Freud once walked into his study. He wrote this whole article, and he kicked off his slipper. You know, he had his slippers and kicked them off, and the slipper flew in the air and knocked over a statue of Venus, right, the goddess of love, knocked it down and broke it. He wrote this long thing about what was going in his mind, and why it wasn't an accident. There are no accidents. Something in his unconscious he was furious about love, and maybe he was mad at his wife, or did he have some secret lust that he couldn't deal with, so he was destroying Venus, this kind of stuff. Okay, but we're all different, and the things we like and don't like, the things that appeal to us and don't appeal to us. No one has a conscious reason why you're a homosexual or a heterosexual. It's just there. And Freud says this is things from your unconscious, motivating your conscious personality, and you just don't. Right? You just don't realize it. So he talks about narcissism, and therapists talk about narcissistic personalities. People who love themselves, right? And narcissism is characterized by the fact that basically what he said, and interestingly enough, later research psychologists who observed infants said the same thing. He didn't do too much observing of kids, but he was right on with a lot of it. Just talked mostly to their mothers, sometimes, mostly to adult women. The kid cannot separate self from the oral pleasure, namely the breast, right? The breast is part of me. I'm everything. Okay? And narcissistic personalities, right, they don't get over that. First of all, if you ask me to explain why, I could probably stumble through it, but I'm not an expert on Freud, but also it's beyond the scope of this course. But there are people who really have narcissistic personalities. This comes in infancy, so you'll find children, and certainly adolescents, who have narcissistic personalities, and adults. I'm the center of everything. Everything has to be for me. What happens later, let's go back to the PowerPoint. What happens later, in the later period, is characterized by the urge to bite and by separation anxiety. All of a sudden, I realize, okay, come back to me. All of a sudden, I realize this breast is separate from me. It can go away. So I get full of anxiety about it. And we'll see later how Erickson talks about whether, if the anxiety gets enough, we become mistrusting personalities. And there's this urge to bite, to hold on to it. Okay? Which doesn't matter when you don't have teeth. When you have teeth, mother gets a little annoyed by that, right? You're biting me, it hurts. Okay? Now, what Freud says is, the question is, to what extent are oral pleasures, is this need for this oral pleasure fulfilled in the kid, in the infant? And to the extent that it's not, and it's never completely for 100% for everyone, right? Then we're going to see aspects of personality, oral fixation, in other words, oral aspects of our personality. So for instance, let's go back to the PowerPoint. People with oral fixations, it's a preoccupation with oral activities like eating, overeating. Come back to me for a second. Look. Once again, you have to be very, very careful about judging things by behaviors. There used to be a thing called the Schick Center. And they had a cure for smoking. They guarantee they cure you of smoking. What would they do? You'd smoke. Zap! They give it a little electric shock. People got upset with it, so they don't do it anymore. But that's what they do, and it worked. They also had the same thing for eating. You start to eat something you're not supposed to eat, zap. They wouldn't guarantee it. It worked for some people, not for others, because oral activities are complex. Okay, in our society, we clearly don't just eat for survival. Right? I sure don't. As Benjamin Franklin said, you should eat to live, not live to eat. He was wrong. Okay. Okay, you eat because it gives you pleasure, give kind of certain thing. All right, let me ask you a question. How many people here, and it can work both ways, by the way, how many people here might as well, when you're full of anxiety, studying for a test or something that's very important, it would save time to just take your desk and move it right next to the refrigerator, because who eats a lot when you're anxious? See, that's a regression in a time of anxiety. And how many people cannot eat at all when you're full of anxiety? You're kidding me. Every day I pray, dear God, just 2 months of anorexia, then cut it off, right? Right? So, anorexia, and believe me, those are all these disorders, and it's much more complex than this, but come from this background with eating and oral pleasures, the nature of all pleasures, and guilt about oral pleasures, etc., etc. It's not so clear that there are other things going on with those disorders too, but eating, okay? I knew one guy. We used to be so jealous of each other, right? We were doing projects and he couldn't eat. He would, to the point where he was messing up his health, and I'd sit there stuffing the stuff into my mouth. We gotta get it done. I just wish I could be. I said, all I could, just tell me how you do it. Get so anxious you can't eat. But okay, eating. Here, another one. Let's go back here. Biting. Let's go back to people. We're gonna take a little vote here. Ready? Let's go back to the regular. It's back to me and back to the crowd here. Hello? Okay. How many people here bite on pencils when you're anxious? Chew on pencils. Anybody bite on your hand? I used to do that when I was in high school. Bite in the back of your hand? That's a pretty common one. You're the only one, just the two of us, you two? Yeah? Oral activities under time. It's a regression to the oral stage. Okay? How many people prefer pretzels to ice cream? Anybody? Yeah. You'd rather bite on something hard than suck on something. So pretzels, let's say, to a softy yogurt. You prefer that? Yeah? Yeah, right? Because it's biting. Biting, you want to bite. That's your oral pleasure. Come back to me for a second. Erickson did a very interesting study. He studied a society in which the children nursed from the extended family, from the clan, right? So you can nurse from your biological mother, from your aunts, right? So there's always somebody around to nurse. And the kids nursed until they were 3, or whenever they want to nurse. They just go up and say, hey, right? There's always a woman around. You can find one. You can nurse from 7, 8 different women, right? The trouble is when they got teeth, it hurt. And they would bite, would hurt. So they would just give the kid a little thump on the head. Wouldn't hurt the kid, but give him a little thump on the head when he was biting. Okay, these people, okay, let's go back here. Let's go back to the PowerPoint for a second. Smoking, right? In this society, come back to me. See, we wean kids early. We get kids on whole food early and biting down on food early. So Freud would say in our society, a lot of kids don't get enough sucking, so we smoke, suck on straws. What kind of way is that to drink? Suck on straws, that kind of thing. These people had none of that. But what they did, instead of smoking, he wrote this at a time when everybody smoked, right? A lot of people smoked. They had a nut, a natural nut that grew there, and had a very, very hard shell. So they didn't crack open the nut to eat it. They would put the nut between their teeth and bite down on it all day. It was like smoking. Just take your little nut and... Because their biting had been frustrated. That's what he said. Okay? By the way, there's another one I didn't put on the list. Talking a lot. I'll tell you the truth. I have a lot of oral aspects to my personality. When I get under pressure or tension, I have this overwhelming urge to tell a joke. How many people here, when you get under tension, you can't control your talking? Anybody like that? It just comes out. Yeah? You and I are like twins. Same thing? Does anybody just the opposite? You just can't talk at all. You just lose it completely. That Freud, that's also an aspect of it. Okay? So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Regressions are characterized by a temporary fixation with oral activities, like eating all the time, or chain smoking when you're nervous due to frustration. And the stronger a fixation, the more likely a regression. You understand what I'm saying? So people who in general have oral, come back to me, oral aspects of their personality, right? Tend to overeat and talk a lot. They'll, under times of stress, they'll go back. Interestingly enough, I'll tell you the truth. I hate drinking through a straw. I never do it. Rarely. Once in a while. I like to talk. I eat too much. Never smoked. Never appealed to me. So you have to be careful about this. I'm telling you this because as you go through this, if you do not go through leave the class today thinking that you're crazy, there's something wrong with your personality, you're nuts, everybody has this stuff, then you weren't listening. Everybody's nuts. Okay? That's what Freud is going to tell us. Now, so this is the oral stage, and we all have their oral aspects of personality. The next stage, let's go back to the PowerPoint, is the anal stage. 1.5 to 3 years old, and of course, this is the time of toilet training, and energy from the libido was centered on the anal zone and its products, right? And he's talking about defecation and urination. Okay, come back to me for a second. By definition, this is problematic because my id says, I want to do it when I want to do it, where I want to do it. That's all. I'm going to go, leave me alone. No, it's got to be in the bathroom. No, it's got to be here. So already there's an id frustration. That's why we're all crazy. Okay? There's an id frustration. Okay? Because the child, here, come back here, is asked to renounce instinctive pleasure, the id pleasure, by becoming toilet trained. And this results in anger, of course, and testing of parents. I'm angry. Okay? Come back to me. By definition, I'm angry. You are frustrating my id pleasures. And I don't like it. So I'm going to challenge you. The most obvious way to say, I don't care what you say, I want to do it when I want to do it, where I want to do it. Leave me alone. Or, who has kids here? Who has kids? Less people. You don't have kids here? No, less people than I thought. All right. Some of you probably had a kid. You don't have to say anything unless you want to. Said, okay, you want me to do what I want? I'm not doing it. There's some kids who literally, especially with defecating, I'm going to the bathroom for 3 days. I'm not doing it. No. Sit on the potty. Okay, I'll sit, but I'm not doing it. Right? Testing. One of my kids, cognitively he was great. All of a sudden it became clear to him, we wanted him toilet trainer, he was 2 years old. He had a pencil, I don't know how he did it, and he put like a little flag on it. That was his diaper flag. He taped it. I couldn't walked around, diaper, give me diaper. That was it. I'm not doing it. Leave me alone. Testing. I'll tell you how I got to do it. He heard me. He was over to it too. It's 26, 27 months, and he heard me making arrangements for childcare. He got it. I see him when he comes to me, and he's got about 3 pencils in his hand like this. I said, what? I said, how come you have the pencils? He said, school, going to school. I said, yeah, I'm not so sure. 6 hours later, he says, why not? I said, well, they don't take you to school until you're toilet trained. I swear, not that, the day after that, the next. Took him 2 days, done. Right? He was testing me. He could do it. Now, you have to be careful here, right? It's, there has to be a certain amount of muscle control to do it. Boys, it's very difficult for boys much younger than 2 to do it, to be toilet trained. And of course, all kinds of terrible things happen. Girls, for reasons I can't remember anymore, girls tend to develop physiologically a little faster than boys. Like, all the writing we talked about, the handwriting, where boys all have rotten handwriting, because most of them come to first grade, they just don't have the fine motor control to make their letters. More girls do. But you can imagine what happens if you're demanding from a kid to be toilet trained. The kid is physiologically unable to do it. But it can happen to girls too. It's all, you know, on a normal distribution. There are some girls who really don't have the physiological development to do it until they're 2, right? Or older, but usually girls can do it a little earlier than boys, okay? So there's anger and there's testing of parents, and how you react to the parents and how you test, how you get determines a large part of your adult personality, okay? Let's try this. How many people here, I'm going to paint 2 extremes, and you vote the one you're close, but who's at this extreme? Your desk really is never messy. As you go around and study and do things, things just stay very, very neat. Who's that way? And how many people here do the following? Your desk is the worst, come back to me for a second. Your desk is the worst, we had about half the people, worst god-awful mess you can see. Say, today I'm cleaning it up. You clean it up, you clean it up, you clean it up, you clean it up, it's finally clean. 2 days later, you're right back where you started. My hands up, who else? About 50-50. You're both nuts, we're both nuts. Anal retentive, anal expulsive, okay? We'll see this, okay? That comes back to the way in which you tested your parents with toilet training, okay? By the way, kids also become fascinated. They realize this is really the only thing they produce. They realize they're producing it. Kids play with their feces all the time. Is that a mommy talking? Yeah. I don't know if I should say this on TV, but I'm going to anyway. Come to my oldest son. He's in the bathtub. I put him in there waiting. I was going to change him. All of a sudden, I come in there. He's got this stuff smeared all over the walls. So this is in Israel, so he never heard the word outside because people talk in Hebrew, and we were very careful what we said to him. He's going, shit, shit, and he's making sound familiar? Who else? Your kids? Oh yeah, look at all the parents going, oh yeah! And it's something I made. It's a product that I made. It's mine. So you get that, oh boy. So you thought only your kid was nuts, right? They're all that way. Not all kids do that, but a lot of kids do. Okay, a lot of kids do. They're fascinated with it, and the idea is to control it. Thank God he was in the bathtub. I just washed everything down, right? But the kids will put it on the wall everywhere, okay? And that's a sign of, and you'll often see people who are extremely, this is when my daughter is just about to finish being a nurse. Time you see this tape, she will be one the next semester, okay? We hope, okay? Am I allowed to say God willing on public university? I'll say it anyway. Okay, so the people who are very, very, have a lot of retardation and severe mental illness, they'll often play with their feces all the time, right? Adults. But because they're stuck here, you know, they're like. Anyway, so what happens? Let's go to the anal stage fixations. We get anal compulsive. These are the neat freaks. These are the people who said, I'm going to control it. I'm going to go when I want. You want me to go now in the toilet? No. Everything has to be. This is sometimes called anal retentive. Okay? I'll tell you a story, right? Anal retentive. These are the people retaining everything. Everything's got to be just so. It's going to keep it my way, right? One day we had 2 guys in the faculty. One's still is, one's not. He goes and he found a fertilizer that works great in his lawn. He says, come on, you got to see my lawn. They live right next to each other. So he goes and he says, it's beautiful. And he's bought bags and bags of this fertilizer, and he's got it all there. He said, what is it? He said, it's fertilizer made from sewage water, from human sewage water. Recapturing human sewage water. So it's human sewage. So the one says to the other, he said, I've heard of being anal retentive, but piling it up in your garage is more than I heard. All right? So, some people, I'm not going to ask for hands, it doesn't bother them. Some people are disgusted at the thought of human fertilizer in your garage, right? Even though it's dry. That has to do with your what happened when you're toilet training. The other one, let's go back to the PowerPoint, is what's called anal expulsive, sloppy, messy, disorganized. Okay? So, let's take another vote. Okay? Come back to me. How many people here who their desk is neat have a thing about coming on time? You got to be on time a little early, right? And how many people, most of you, not all, but most, how many people here who desk is messy are late all the time, most of the time. No kidding, that's interesting. How many people here, if I said, you can come 15 minutes early to the meeting and people are taking a look, what are you doing here so early? Or 15 minutes late and just walk in when it's going on. Who'd prefer to come early? That's because you're all teachers. Who'd prefer to come late? Just a few of us, right? We have 3 classic anal expulsive personalities here. Of course, we all have it all, right? If it can go enough, you'd see all of you have oral fixations, all of you have anal fixations. But that's the idea, things about time, etc. This is deep, deep, deep in personality. And you are not, whether Freud's explanation is right or wrong, it is. And you are not going to change this with 3 M&Ms and a smiley face. Some people are just organized and people are not. What is the thing? There are some people who just, who's ever had students, they just can't come on time no matter what. I'm one of them, right? I mean, I can see it. I'll start coming here, then I'll see someone, and I can just walk by and I stop to talk and I'm late, right? It just happens. What is the thing to tell a kid who is always late? There's one good piece of advice. Become a doctor, right? Doctors are never on time. I once had I wound up in a mental hospital. Going to the doctor's office, I have an appointment at 3:30. I get there at 3:29. At 3:30, they come and take me back to his office. You know that trick. Then you sit there for 50 minutes. 5 minutes later, he walks in. I started hyperventilating. So what happened? You're on time. Doctors are never on time. 2 patients canceled, right? I mean, it doesn't, right? They're never on time. So, right, there are certain jobs, interestingly enough, the higher up in the education hierarchy you go, the less it matters. Nobody cares. I come 3 minutes late to a class. Who cares? Right? The only time lawyers have to be on time is when they go to court. Otherwise, you can sit around the lawyer's office, whatever, you know. Yeah, go ahead.
My husband happens to be a Marine, and his closet, as well as mine now, because he's reorganized, is color coordinated. We have to be everywhere 15 minutes early, and it's pretty strict in my house. That's
right. Interestingly enough, if you don't have that kind of personality, it's very difficult. You may be able to run 500 miles an hour with 400 pounds on your back and a crack shot and all this stuff, but if you can't go by the way the thing is organized, you can't be a soldier or a Marine, right? You don't want to have soldiers who say, I'll do it in 10 minutes. Oh, wait, I got to talk to this guy. You don't want to do that, especially if they're guarding your flank. Take my word for it. And of course, most of us can do it. When I was a soldier, I managed to be on time, because it's life and death, right? I mean, most people are not at the extremes. But I'll give you an example of an extreme. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Compulsive behaviors can be traced to fixation at this stage, says Freud. Okay, I'll tell you a story. Come back to me. There's a drug that can stop anal compulsive behaviors, right? Obsessive compulsive behaviors, they call them, right? Which Freud says is an extreme of anal obsessive compulsive. There's a drug. I worked in a clinic where, I remember I told you the educational stuff in the clinic, but the head of the clinic was a psychiatrist. When the drug first came out, he said, this drug must be administered in a hospital. I said, huh? Everybody said, what are you, nuts? And the guy was sort of a semi-classic Freudian. He wasn't 100% Freudian, but he was close. He said, look, for some people, this is an annex to their personality. Some people take this drug, it's like a miracle. They just stop these compulsive behaviors. But some people, you are physiologically incapable to do it because that's how the drug works in their brain. They have literally psychotic breakdowns. And he called it. This was one smart cookie. He called it. He said some people are going to become schizophrenic over this. They become psychotic breakdowns. They just lose everything, right? Because this compulsive behavior is tying together their personality. They're so fixated at this stage, it's everything that they are. And he was right. That's what you do now when you give this drug. You have to do it in a hospital. Because a couple of people freaked out in people's offices and it wasn't pretty. Or on the way home. I mean, they went psychotic. So you got to be careful about that. Okay. Now, once again, let me say that everybody's going to have some of this. one of the most interesting contributions that Freud made for us, here, let's go to the overhead. I'm on the wrong thing. Wait a minute. Is the idea of a syndrome. Right? That behaviors are not simply unrelated collections of behaviors, but a bunch of different behaviors can be traced to one underlying psychological cause. It's not an accident that Freud was an MD. It's not an accident. Okay? For a long time, you know, Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath, if you read Hippocrates' stuff, it's interesting stuff. I didn't read too much. His idea was you treat symptoms. Somebody has a sore throat, you give them you soothe the throat. Runny nose, you give something for their nose. Right? A fever, you put cold rags on their head. Later, medicine came along and said, wait a minute. This is not it. All of those seemingly unrelated symptoms, you have a bone ache, and they're due to one underlying cause, a streptococcus bacterium, or a colony of streptococci, yeah, that kind of stuff. You have a strep throat. That's why your throat hurts and you have a fever and this and that, right? Or your eyes are watering, your nose are running, this and that. It's one part of one thing. It's an allergic reaction to something, right? And Freud brought that idea into psychology. That certain kinds of personality characteristics that are linked together. Now, it's not tight. We saw here that not everyone who's I'm ready to bet that the 3 people who said I'm always late are the ones whose desk is the hopelessly messiest. My desk is such a god-awful mess, it's unbelievable. Once I said to a therapist, you got to help me, what do I do? It's a friend of mine. He said, don't you know what to do? That's easy. I said, what? He said, hire a secretary. He's telling me, you're never going to overcome that. This is too deep in personality. How many people here, if I tell you, you have to leave this finished cup of coffee on the desk, I'll pay you $50, and has to stay there for 3 days, unwashed with a brown crud at the bottom, couldn't do it. You couldn't do it? I thought you were a neat freak. I thought you were a sloppy mess.
I'm always late, but I'm a complete neat freak.
Who's a complete neat freak? Yeah, couldn't do it. How many people say, well, I'm a neat freak, but for $50, I'll do it? Yeah, you see, so most of us are in the middle on some of this stuff and a little freaky on the rest of this stuff, right? I can do it. It's just nothing to it. It happens all the time, right? Graduate assistants come in, leave a cup of coffee. I figured, whoever it is will come back. A week later, they come back. After a while, it starts to grow moss. I get rid of it. But you understand what I'm saying. I'm really not that bad. So it depends. But this idea that personality characteristics come together and then you can trace it to what goes on late in life, earlier in life, that's part of Freud. Okay, let's go to the next stage, which is the Oedipal stage, or the phallic stage, sometimes called the Oedipal stage, and this is for boys. Freud did a lot better work with boys than with girls on this. His followers admit it. And we're going to do it with boys, and then we'll see. With girls, I'll give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. For boys, the libido is centered in the penis, and obviously the girls in the vagina, right? Okay. Now, here's what happens, okay? Here's what happens. Come to me, okay? Your mother is your chief care provider, right? She's nursed you, she's this, she's that. She's the only woman in your life. This is age 3 to 6, right? Around age 3, begin to awaken. Libidinal energy moves into the genitals, into the penis. Although it's not adult sex, it's not clear whether boys actually want to have sexual intercourse with their mothers, but that's the implication. And now you've got a competitor, your father. I remember Freud comes from a society that was very traditional society. Okay, so it was mostly mother-father. Okay, I mean, it was living in late 19th century, early 20th century Europe. Okay, so now you're competing with your father, but it's no contest. But since it's no contest, right? He's big, you're little. And since you see him as a competitor, he sees you as a competitor. So you want your mother. You think he sees you as a competitor. Obviously, a man doesn't think a 3-year-old kid is a competitor or a 4-year-old kid, woman, wife's affected. So basically, you want to sleep with your mother. You want to have sex with your mother, right? Now, they're probably, if you were to ask 25 million males under truth serum whether they want to have sex with their mother, they would all tell you no. If they could get it out before they were said, whoa. It's repressed. It's repressed, but it's in there. And what happens, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Because of this competition with your father for the affection, you have a fear of castration anxiety. My father's going to come and cut it off. That way I won't be a competitor for him. Well, so come back to me. So what can you do? What can you do? What he says you do is that instead of fighting with your father, because it's no hope, he's got all the power, he's big, you're little, you have a complete identification with your father. Right? You identify with your father, you identify with your father's goals, you identify with your father's values. Here's where the superego is coming in. Okay? So let's take a look at this. You got a repression of your sexual feelings for your mother, and you identify with your father. This identification with your father tells you it's disgusting to want to sleep with your mother. So you get my picture in there, okay? It's disgusting. It's wrong. Okay? You identify completely with your father and your father's ideals. Come back to me, okay? And you were... Put the picture back on me. And you repress it, your feelings for your mother. You identify completely with your father, just as he had done with his father. And you project your sexual feelings onto other women. Okay. Now, some of this stuff is interesting. This comes out in strange ways. So what Freud is telling you is you really hate your father's guts. You hate your father's guts for several reasons. First of all, you hate your father. You know, I'm simplifying this, but it'll make the point. Because your father's a competitor for your mother. Second, in order to relieve this overwhelming anxiety, you identify with your father and your father's ideas and ideals, and you develop a superego. And what part of you hates the superego? The id hates the superego. All of a sudden, you've got to something here not saying, no, wait a minute. Don't do it until it's rational, right? Don't rob the bank until you got a good plan. Now you've got somebody saying, it's wrong. It's wrong. And we can see, by the way, it's wrong. And so that makes you furious too. And Freud is going to tell you it is this improper identification with your father, either an incomplete identification with your father and not doing it well and not developing a strong superego. You've got to get the identification in place, the repression of feeling in place, and develop a strong superego, and that is what makes you a healthy person. So for instance, men who rape women, their rage is coming out. When you hear people say, this is not an act of sex, it's an act of aggression, it's both. Okay? It's an act of aggression. It's an act of rage and hate, but it's also, you've identified with your father to the point where you've turned it out onto other women, but you don't have a strong conscience in place. So you do just horrible things. Right? Interestingly enough, Freud will tell you, disagrees profoundly with Bandura about the nature of pornography and all these kinds of things. For instance, what Freud tells you is, when the id comes boiling up and the superego is having trouble dealing with it, the superego will try to release this, pressure, okay, this libidinal pressure. He calls it a catharsis, okay? It's a release of sexual energy, okay? So, come back to me. So, for instance, whenever they find, let's say they find, when they find men who brutalize women, right? They will invariably find tons of pornography in their apartments, right? Tons of pornography. But they'll say, see, I told you, they read all this stuff, and they modeled it. The Freudians say, well, give me a break. I happen to think there's a lot to the Freudians' argument. I think there's a lot to it. Who goes out and buys this stuff? The average person on the street doesn't buy it. Besides, most of the people who buy it don't actually engage in the acts. This is an attempt, in a less socially unacceptable way, to release this libidinal energy. You look at the pictures. You read about it. See what I'm saying? You release the emotional tension that way. Not the emotional, the libidinal energy that way. Most people who buy pornography don't do it because it's enough for them. They can get the catharsis this way. It doesn't help. It's just not enough. Their superegos are so weak and so not in place, they have to go out and actually perform the act of violence or whatever they're doing, right? I picked rape, but there are other acts of violence too, right? So this is what he's going to, okay, so he's going to explain things this way. He's going to explain other things, like, you go into the store, you see all kinds of, what do we call them? They used to call them perversions. Now it's preferences. I promise you. Think up with the craziest thing, right? People who are, for instance, fetishes, shoe fetishes. I'm ready to bet that if you get on the internet, I've never done this, and look up, go to Google and put shoe fetish in, they'll get you lists of websites. They'll be full of them, right? Make something up. People are turning on my bananas with brown spots. I'll bet there are 15 websites, right? And most of this comes from the oral and anal stages. But this kind of feeling, these aggressions and anger, that comes from the Oedipal stage. Okay? And what happens, he says, is that now what's going to happen, be socially accepted. You identify with your father, who hopefully has good moral values. Okay? You take on his moral values, which is the values of society. And because you're identifying, you have a strong superego, and that represses the instincts that you have for going after your mother, and you go after someone else. But inside, you don't like it. Okay? And inside, there are certain defense mechanisms, things where the cathartic energy becomes too much, where you take it out a different way. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples here. Sometimes when you have these overwhelming urges of hate, and your superego is telling you you're not supposed to hate people, you project your feeling onto other people. Right? I don't know if you remember, but at one time, Yasser Arafat's wife gave a speech. This was the time that Hillary Clinton hugged her, and I'm not even sure if she was in the translation, and said, the Jews want to poison our water. They want to poison our water. Now, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have been on Israel's water system at that time since 1968 or 9, right? I get an email from this friend of mine. He says, now I'm scared. He's a clinical psychologist, right? Now I'm scared. We were graduate students together, but he went off in that direction. We did our master's degrees together. He said, that's a projection. That's what she wants to do to us. Now I'm frightened. That's a projection. No, it's right or wrong. That's the point, right? How many times have you heard people ranting, that person is a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you say, she's describing herself, or he's describing himself. Am I right? You're taking your feelings of anger, or your feelings, right, and you're projecting it onto other people. She really wants to poison our water, right? He wants to do this to me. He wants to do that to me. He wants to do this to me. It's not true. And you realize from the anger that it's really the other way around. Sometimes we have, I can never remember the word, where you put it off, not you don't project it, but you put it off. Oh, this is Freud will tell you, like, well, I'll give you an example. Here's Freud's explanation for anti-Semitism. Okay? Your id hates your superego. Now in Christianity, the superego has an embodiment. Who's the superego in Christianity? Say it. Right. That's a superego. That's the one, that's the part. Jesus tells you, don't do this and don't do that and do this and do that and be good and be kind and be nice and don't exploit people. And you're just saying, I want to do all that, so I don't want to do any of that. So you can't say, it's called, I can't remember the word, where you put the feelings onto someone else. Yeah, you know the word? Displacement, thank you. Displacement, bless you. It's called, so you displace the feelings onto someone else. So rather than saying I hate Jesus, which is a horrible thing to do, can't do that, you say, you displace your feelings onto the, who produced Jesus. The Jews produced Jesus. So I hate the Jews. Right? That's a displacement defense mechanism. So you don't have to say, oh, by the way, he didn't let the Jews off for free. He wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism, and here's what he said. In Judaism, the representative of the superego is Moses, or it's God, but Moses is God's messenger. Moses comes down and says, don't do this, don't murder, and don't steal, and don't commit adultery, all the stuff my id wants to do. I want to jump him and steal his watch. Right? No, his pen and her watch. So he claims in monotheism that the Jews murdered Moses in the desert, killing the father. They really did it. They killed the father. And then they had what's called a reaction formation. You will often hear a reaction formation is doing just the opposite. Kids who are abused by their parents, oh, I love her, oh, I love her. Matter of fact, in the old days, they used to, when a kid was abused, they didn't know which parent, they stand the parents up, they put the kid in the middle and see which parent the kid ran to and assume the other one was the abuser. It's not true. Often the kid will run to the abusing parent. It's a reaction formation. Oh, my mother was wonderful. My mother was marvelous. My father was wonderful. My mother was marvelous. Because you're not allowed to hate your parents. Your superego was telling you no. Meanwhile, people say, what are you talking about? They neglected the kid. They didn't do anything for the kid. So he says that it became a neurosis, a national neurosis. All the Jews, they got so upset with this. They felt so guilty that they became, Moses is wonderful, his law is wonderful, we got to stick to that no matter what. And that's how he explains the fact that despite this intense pressure to convert, how the core of the Jews would never do it. Under penalty of death, they wouldn't do it. Because if they did it, he said, they'd have to admit that they killed their father. It would be, you want to know what I think of those two explanations? I think they're both ridiculous. Yeah, well, let me put it this way. They both leave much to be desired. They're not ridiculous, but I don't accept them. But it's something interesting because he tells you how the deep inside, right, things like projection, things like displacement, they're real. These are defense mechanisms we put up to deal with, and things to deal with, and feelings you just can't describe. Why are some people so committed to certain things? And other people say, There's some people here who were passionate about that election. I figured we'll go on with or without. I figure both guys are going to defend the country, and there's a lot of unintended consequences. They both have a good plan, and by the time it goes through Congress, it gets so screwed up anyway. I wasn't that passionate about the whole thing. I couldn't decide what to vote for to the last minute. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for either. So if things come out great, I'll say Bush. If they come out rotten, I'll say Kerry. Right? Did you have a question? You want to ask? Yeah.
Well, it's more of a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to argue, but I'm just saying about Christianity. It's not about being good or bad. That's the law. It's an Old Testament time.
Right.
But actually, Christ, is to give us life. Oh Lord, give us life. Life.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you If
Oh,
you
but
go,
see, I don't argue.
right, I understand that. But if you go around and saying, oh, I accept Jesus, I think I'll go and rob that store and blow the clerk's head off. You really haven't accepted him, have you? Accepting Jesus requires you to be a certain kind of person, right? It makes you into a certain kind of, right?
Well, yeah, it's by life, you know. Like,
Right.
for example, an infant, you have to feed an infant over time, right? He eats. So even in John, it speaks about...
I'll tell you what.
Let's,
We're coming to a break. Let's talk about this first after the break, so get the idea, and then we'll finish the discussion of Freud. All right? See you after the break.